The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We welcome you back to the fall edition of the Volpe Report. This will conclude, believe it or not, our 8th year on the air. The purpose of this show, you remember, is to bring to you those people who run our government or would like to. We are living in historical times when it seems who we are as a people and a country is on trial as never before. Therefore, it is our distinct honor to bring to you those political leaders who will determine what type of future we will have. We are pleased to present as our first guest for our fall season, Sean Parnell, who is seeking the Republican nomination for United States Senator of Pennsylvania. He aspires to fill the seat that will become open when current United States Senator Pat Toomey retires. Sean attended Clarion University, pursuing a degree in elementary education when the Twin Towers came down on 9/11. He was incensed by what happened, and he immediately transferred to Duquesne University in Pittsburgh to join their ROTC program. Upon graduation, Sean was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army, and then went on to become an airborne ranger before joining the elite 10th Mountain Division. Sean was deployed in Afghanistan in 2006 and 2007, where he spent 485 days fighting along the Afghan-Pakistan border. Sean led a platoon, later known as the Outlaws, that battled the Taliban and other enemy soldiers in the Hindu Kush Mountains. His outlaw platoon killed more than 350 enemy fighters in some of the biggest firefights in the Afghan war. Sean was wounded in action when his platoon was nearly overrun by an enemy force that outnumbered them almost 10-1. Despite his injuries, Sean refused to leave his men as they battled the enemy at point-blank range. Despite being knocked unconscious and wounded several times during the firefight, Sean continued to lead his platoon into battle. For the next several weeks, despite head and neurological wounds, including cerebral and spinal fluid leakage from his ears and nose, he continued to patrol with his men. Finally, he was discharged because of his medical injuries from the Army. Upon his retirement due to his wounds, Sean was a highly decorated captain. He was awarded 2 Bronze Stars, one for valor in combat, and received a Purple Heart. After his service, he returned back to Duquesne University in Pittsburgh and went on to earn his master's degree in psychology. He then went on to write a book named The Outlaw Platoon, which is the story of his platoon's combat in eastern Afghanistan, which went on to become a New York Times bestseller. He is also co-founder of the American Warrior Initiative, and we are going to talk to him today, starting with America's pullout of Afghanistan.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Sean, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to start our season. We run 2 seasons, really. We take 3 months off for the summer. So you're our first guest. We're coming back. I felt today, I told the folks at the studio here, that putting on my suit and tie and all that, taking off my shorts, the flip-flops that I wore all summer. It's like a kid. Summer vacation ended. I'm going back to school. So there's a lot to be serious about going on in our country right now, and summer's over. And I want to talk, as we talked briefly off air, before we get into some of the policy issues, the reasons you're running for United States Senate. You're clearly the front runner right now, there's no doubt. But having said that, let's talk a little bit about why you're a front runner and why your background and your credentials are so important. So I want you to tell your story. And I was an old trial lawyer back in the day, and so I'll ask the questions. It'll be like you're on the witness stand, and you just take it. It'll be considered not a cross, a direct examination. So
you could do the examination, you could do the cross. I mean, this is the job, is to answer your questions. So I'm here for you.
Thanks, Sean. Well, let's start with your story. Gets started with you're at Clarion University. You're preparing to go on to receive an elementary education degree at a good school in Western Pennsylvania, and then 9/11 happened, and that changed your life's course. So, start there. Why did you went to Duquesne University, joined the ROTC, and go?
Yeah. So after 9/11. And by the way, at Clarion University, as you mentioned, I was trying to wrap my mind around how I was going to student teach second grade. I wanted to teach, but I wasn't sure that that's what I was really meant to do with my life. And like many college kids, I think many college kids feel that way. 9/11 happened, and I felt a range of different emotions in the wake of the most horrific terrorist attack in our nation's history. But I was scared, but I was angry as well, and I wanted to do everything I could to get in the fight. So a couple of days after 9/11, went down to the recruiter, said I wanted to join the infantry, and not just that, I wanted to go to airborne school where the Army could teach me how to jump out of perfectly good airplanes, and then I wanted to go to Ranger School because Ranger School was the most elite leadership school that the Army had to offer, and I wanted to be the best leader that I could be for my troops. Then, as you mentioned, I transferred to Duquesne University because at the time, Clarion didn't have an ROTC program. So transferred to Duquesne 2 years after I transferred there, got a commission as a brand new second lieutenant, and found myself boots on the ground in Afghanistan about 18 months later. So in 18 months time, college kid to combat leader in charge of an infantry platoon of 40 men all along the Afghan-Pakistan border with a very simple mission: find Osama bin Laden.
Right. Well, let me talk about. I've got some of the news releases about your service, about what you're talking about. Apparently, it says you spent 485 days in firefights along the Afghan-Pakistan border between 2006 and 2007. Your group now you joined an elite special forces unit, the 10th Mountain Division, correct?
It was an infantry unit, not in military parlance, not technically special forces, just a light infantry, like an elite
unit.
An elite light infantry unit, yes.
And they were referred to as Sean's Outlaws, your platoon.
The outlaw platoon, yes.
And you fought in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Talk a little about that and the terrain.
Yeah, so we were deployed right along the Afghan-Pakistan border, and as I mentioned, our mission was very simple back then: to find Osama bin Laden. And if you remember back in 2006, the eyes of this nation were wholeheartedly fixated on the Iraq War. The debate on Capitol Hill over weapons of mass destruction was raging, and there was a question on everybody's mind. And if you watch the media back then, everyone was talking about the surge, right? And the question around that is, should George W. Bush send surge more troops to the Iraq War that we may or may not be winning in the first place? So many people here in America felt like the war in Afghanistan was just a stability and support operation, and so did we. And when we got to Afghanistan, we realized that couldn't be further from the truth. And real quickly, we learned that the enemy that we were facing there, I mean, really, there were thousands of enemy troops all along that mountainous border region in the Hindu Kush Mountains. They were not a ragtag insurgencies, farmers with pitchforks. No, they were a hardened group of global jihadists who fought against the Russians in the 80s, and then in the Afghan civil war in the 90s, and then in a post 9/11 era against Americans, right? And so what I always tell people, and what we learned very quickly on the battlefield, is that the average foreign fighter that we fought in Afghanistan had 10 years combat experience on your average 18-year-old American private. Wow. So they knew what they were doing. Their tactical acumen was really through the roof. They were great fighters, and every single day, day in and day out, 485 days of combat, 16 months, hundreds of firefights, thousands of indirect fire engagements. We engaged with them every single day. And the enemies of this country, the people who attacked us on 9/11, and looking back on the deployment, to be honest, it's surreal that a young city kid from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it's surreal to me that I made it through that. Right. It just doesn't seem like real life, but it was.
Right. Well, again, some of the news reports from your service are worth hearing. killed over 300, your platoon killed over 350 enemy fighters. Your platoon remains one of the most decorated units in the Army since 9/11. And relative to you, this story is that you were wounded in action on June 10th, 2006, when your platoon was nearly overrun by a force outnumbering your men by 10-1. You refused to leave your men as they battled the enemy at point-blank range, were knocked unconscious, wounded 2 times during the firefight. Continued to lead your men, although you suffered head and neurological wounds, were leaking cerebral and spinal fluid from your ears and nose while you were on patrol with your men. I don't know what a hero is supposed to be by definition, Sean, but that sure sounds like one to me.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's humbling, but I feel like I was really blessed to serve among some incredible heroes. And, you know, the men that I served with, you know, their boots and T-shirts had more experience in the Army than I did when I first joined as a young officer. And they had every reason to sort of stick me in the office and say, do all the paperwork. And, you know, but they didn't, you know, my men took me under their wings and just taught, coached, and mentored me every step of the way on what it meant to be a servant leader. And what I mean by that is that, you know, leadership to me, just the core tenet of how I try to lead is the recognition that leadership is about service first, last, and always. The idea that it's my job as a leader to work for my troops, not the other way around. And so, we were, when I was wounded in Afghanistan, I ended up, I had hairline fractures in my skull and a cerebral spinal fluid leak. And I have been criticized for this in retrospect, like and I get it, by the way, like, hey, you were wounded. Like, shouldn't you have let, you know, another leader who was not wounded fill your shoes, right? Maybe they could have done the job more effectively. And maybe that's right. Maybe not. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback on these types of things. But I was watching my troops who were from every walk of life, as most diverse infantry platoon that you can imagine, Black next to white, Christians next to atheists, Democrats next to Republicans, Northerners next to Southerners. These were just kids who were, you know, I would watch these kids get, you know, do unbelievable things, in some cases get shot in the head, wrap their head in a bandage and be back on patrol in 2 days. Wow. And I think to myself, well, how can I lead these men when they're not leaving themselves? And so at the end of the day in Afghanistan, we fought for one another and we were afraid to let each other down. And so that fear of letting one another down drove us to fight longer and harder than really any of us thought possible. And I think that allowed us to do extraordinary things on the battlefield. And one of the things that I learned was, yeah, we have a lot of sexy gear as Americans. We got great weapons. But the greatest and most formidable weapon that we had as a team was the love and brotherhood that we shared for one another. And that drove us to do extraordinary things in the battlefield. And I feel like I was blessed to be a real small part of it.
Well, you were more than a small part, Sean. And on behalf of everybody, starting with me, thank you for your service, as I said earlier to you. And now we turn our attention. You're running for United States Senate as a Republican nominee for United States Senate. And we have a lot of stuff going on in our country right now. And I'm guessing that some of the same emotions that led you to join the military and change your educational course when you saw 9/11 happen prompted you to get into public life when you see there's another war being waged in our country right now. The oath in the United States Constitution refers to defending our country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We have domestic enemies in this country right now, and we have a cancel culture. We have a woke generation. We have folks that want to tear down and destroy our history, the vestiges of what it means to be American, and teach our children critical race theory in schools, which means apparently, according to the theory, if you're born with white skin, you're born a racist. The day you open your eyes and start breathing oxygen, flat out lying about our country and its history, which is also, you know, there's this theory of thought somehow that everything has changed to become subjective. There are no true facts anymore. There's no truth anymore. It's whatever you think it happens to be. So on a long list of things, I I'm guessing that's what caused you to throw your hat in the ring and become a United States Senator.
Yeah. Look, I mean, my mission right now is to protect and preserve the American way of life. As you said, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that means I did not take an oath to any one political party. Yes, I'm a conservative. I'm running with an R after my name, but this job is about representing the people and ultimately about being a warrior for the state of Pennsylvania and not necessarily seeking the political solution to the problems that we face today, but rather the right solutions for the people of this great commonwealth and our great country. Yeah, I do believe that our country is at risk. And, Joe Biden, I joke on the campaign trail, if you were trying to destroy this country in 8 months or less, what would you do differently than Joe Biden's doing right now? Our debt and deficit is soaring. We're running over a $3 trillion deficit this year alone. Our kids are going to have to pay for that. Our border is flooded, right? Our taxes are rising. Inflation is crushing the middle class. And not only does inflation crush the middle class, inflation really affects our seniors who are living on fixed incomes.
Sure.
American foreign policy doctrine of peace through strength is collapsing all around the world, but most notably right now in Afghanistan. Our allies don't trust us anymore. Our enemies don't fear us. And what this country needs right now is more leaders and fewer politicians. And that's what I aspire to be. When we win, I've been a leader since I was in my early 20s, and I'm going to continue to lead for this great state and this great country to make sure that we can pass down a generation to our children that's rich with opportunity and free.
We touched on a number of points. Very good answer. His administration, President Biden's administration, started with a crisis turned into a fiasco at the border. They were streaming in. He effectively opened our gates, did away with tremendous policies, which in the line of, well, while you're waiting for your hearing, you have to wait in Mexico to get into the country. Well, they were releasing them into the United States, and you know what happens then. They never showed up when the time came to actually certify and register to get a green card. So that's been just one disaster you acknowledged. And now, as a sandwich on the back end from where we sit today, we have, and it's just a sad moment, I believe, in American history, what took place in Afghanistan. So who better than you as a candidate for United States Senate, as a person who fought, nearly died for his country in Afghanistan, to talk about what the president unilaterally did to Americans that were stranded, to our allies that are now being slaughtered by the Taliban. They gave up everything and risked everything to fight for us and help us. We betrayed them and left them for slaughter. So take it up anywhere you want.
I mean, there are so many different angles to this and so many different ways to talk about it. But I guess what sticks out to me the most is that Joe Biden had a conversation with the president of Afghanistan 4 weeks before the collapse of Kabul, 6 weeks before the August 31 withdrawal date. During that conversation, he told the Afghan president to lie to the world about the state of Afghanistan, to lie to the world about the Taliban offensive. And in exchange for lying to the world, he would give him military aid and financial aid for the country. So Joe Biden, as horrible as that conversation was, the lie or the conversation, the quid pro quo with the president of Afghanistan was not even the worst part. The worst part about it was that 4 weeks before the collapse of Kabul, Joe Biden knew the Taliban were going to take over. Why didn't he right then and there tell Americans to get out of that country? Why didn't he right then and there tell our allies to start moving to the Hamid Karzai airport to start evacuations? He knew and he did nothing, which to me means that he intended all along to not only deceive this country, but deceive the world about what was happening in Afghanistan. And I think that's why you've not seen any accountability. Whether the Secretary of Defense, to me, he should resign. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Milley, who oversaw this fiasco, he should resign. The CENTCOM commander, General McKenzie, should resign. Secretary Blinken, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor to the president. Why do these people have jobs? like the commander in chief, the word commander predisposes anything else in the president's title, right? He has a fundamental obligation to our troops and Americans in foreign countries to take care of them first, last, and always, right? But the president did not do that in Afghanistan. He kept his promise to the Taliban to withdraw by August 31st, but broke his promise to the American citizens who were stranded there to get them out before that deadline. I mean, to me, that is one of the most egregious offenses of any American president, Republican or Democrat, in the last 50 years. And it is just unbelievable to me that not only has no one been held accountable, Joe Biden had the gall to go to the podium and say that the operation was an extraordinary success.
Right. Sean, a couple things. You talked about a lot there. First of all, the condemnation isn't from military throughout history, past and present, military leaders. The condemnations are bipartisan from his own party, equally. Democrat Moulton actually went to Afghanistan on an unapproved congressional fact-finding mission with, I think, Congressman Major as well. Yeah. And they reported about the disaster that was going on there. Basically the misleading and telling a far different story, not a truthful story about what was really happening there that they had witnessed with their own eyes. The condemnation throughout NATO, our allies that we've also kind of left in the lurch with all this. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair had this to say in the New York Times. And I'm quoting him now. He said the withdrawal was a cynical political calculation driven by an imbecilic political slogan about ending the forever wars, as if our engagement in 2021 was remotely comparable to our commitment 20 or even 10 years ago. That's now another. Vasil R. Nazar, a former Obama administration official who teaches at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, had this to say. The president has shown a willingness to disregard the views of European allies, a factor that helps account for the frustration in London, Berlin, and other capitals where Mr. Biden's election had been celebrated after Mr. Trump's browbeating. The NATO campaign in Afghanistan was a credit to the solidarity of that alliance, which made Mr. Biden's lack of consultation all the more stinging. Quote, there is a serious loss of trust, and that will require a significant reassurance effort by Washington, said Wolfgang Ischinger, a former German ambassador to the United States.
Look, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's widespread bipartisan and international condemnation of what the president is doing in Afghanistan. And it's what I think what is so frustrating is that it's very, very clear, I think, to the vast majority of Americans, Democrats, independents, Republicans, what have you, that there is a leadership vacuum at the top in this country. And Joe Biden just seems wholly disengaged. It's almost like he doesn't care. And I think when he went out to the podium and he gave that speech where he said Afghanistan is an extraordinary success, which of course it's not. He also said at the end of that speech, I've got a list of reporters of who I'm supposed to call on. I think America in that moment said, okay, wait a second. Who behind the scenes is telling the commander in chief what journalists he's allowed to call on, right? And so I mentioned earlier in the interview that our allies don't trust us. And if we're not having the backs of our allies in Afghanistan, and not only are we not having their backs, right, we are actively funding and negotiating with the Taliban, who was working closely with the Haqqani Network, which is a designated terrorist group of the United States. Siraj Haqqani, who is a high-level member of the Haqqani Network, is responsible for security in and around Kabul. He's woven into the interim government, Taliban government there in Kabul. He's got a $5 million State Department bounty on his head. The Biden administration is actively working diplomatically with terrorist organizations. So not only are we don't have the backs of our allies, that much is clear, but we're actively working against them. And in doing so, we've established a terrorist super state in Afghanistan leading into the 20th anniversary of September 11th. This world, as a result, is a far more dangerous place. We talk about our allies don't trust us. A perfect example is not only do our allies on the ground in Afghanistan not trust us, but if you're a nation that signed onto the Abraham Accords, recognizing Israel, right? You're thinking right now, holy cow, if America can't even honor its commitment to our allies in Afghanistan, where they spent 20 years bleeding in that country to give them a shot at freedom, are they going to have our back? In fact, they're probably not. They're probably going to work to establish another Iranian nuclear deal with Iran, who is an enemy, right? So this makes the world more dangerous. And ultimately, I think it destabilizes the world by diminishing America's power. And that's a very, very bad thing for future generations of this country.
No question, Sean. I mentioned to you before we went on air, I read a piece in the Scranton Times today, an op-ed piece written by an Afghani fighter. And it's really heartbreaking in a way and sad looking forward for our future. He talked about the people, the Afghani people that had fought with the Americans, who want to have freedoms, do not want to be oppressed by the Taliban or Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and that they were literally risking their lives and getting killed to support the Americans who were in Afghanistan, the American military. And when we pulled out, he said, we will never trust America again. And they're the people, as you know, Sean, as we found out in Vietnam, if the Vietnamese people weren't for the ultimate goal, you can't win the war, and obviously we didn't win the war in Vietnam, the people have to believe in their hearts and minds that we're there for them and their benefit. If they don't trust us, who's going to fight the Taliban? I mean, who's going to fight the growth of terrorism? And once it grows, it gets exported to here.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I'll say this, we talk about bipartisan consensus. I do think that there was some bipartisan consensus that we needed to transition out of Afghanistan, right? Like we were there for 20 years. I just turned 40 in July. So we've been at war in Afghanistan, where I was wounded for half of my life, right? I think that there are people in this country that wanted to leave, but not the way that we did. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. There's a way that we can retrograde operations in Afghanistan while still honoring the commitments of our allies. That did not happen. And yes, you're right. The Afghans, nothing has been more difficult for me. It's just as saying, not even as a Senate candidate, but someone who has fought in Afghanistan alongside the Afghans who wanted a shot at their freedom, who by and large were patriotic and courageous and wanted to fight for their country. Nothing has been more difficult for me to have to watch this from thousands of miles away and my friends get killed, executed. Not only that, our government, our president is actively funding the terrorists, the Taliban, by the way, who have been killing American troops for 20 years. I'm sorry, but that is it's just an unforgivable offense that just is such a slap in the face to anybody that served in that country or anyone who had a family member wounded or God forbid, die in Afghanistan. It's just offensive.
Well, Sean, I would like to get you back in sooner than later to talk about the second half of your candidacy and what needs to get fixed in America. So thank you for your time.
No question about it. Yeah, you're welcome. Hey, there lots of problems that we face as a country, and 30 minutes just isn't enough time to discuss all of them. So I will absolutely be back.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for your time and your
Thank
service.
you. You're welcome.